Well, Tip O'Neill could have blamed Ronald Reagan, but he didn't. According to political rules, the Democratic Speaker of the House, Thomas P. O'Neill, could have blamed Republican President Ronald Reagan the last time an airliner crashed into the Potomac River. Tip O'Neill could have blamed Ronald Reagan, but he didn't, because the rules of common decency would not allow it. And Tip O'Neill's first impulse after the crash was not blame. It was sympathy. And so Democrats did not blame Republican President Ronald Reagan, even though in the single stupidest tough guy move by a president in domestic policy in the 1980s, Ronald Reagan, on August 5th, 1981, not quite 6 months into his presidency, fired 11,345 air traffic controllers in the middle of a labor dispute. It was the single biggest blow to the American aviation industry in its history to that point. And 5 months after, President Reagan fired 11,345 air traffic controllers. A 737 crashed into the Potomac with 79 people aboard. I was thinking about that crash in our live coverage at this hour last night, which became this network's first full live hour of coverage of last night's plane crash. I was thinking about that 1982 crash because I could remember the dramatic images of the 5 people who were pulled out of that river by civilians who jumped out of their cars and professional rescue teams who responded immediately. And I was desperately hoping to see scenes like that once again last night, as I knew people in Kansas, in Washington, and elsewhere in the country with loved ones on that airplane were hoping to see. They were hoping to see exactly that. And I knew that the worst words that you can hear about aviation accidents are mid-air collision. And since we knew almost immediately last night that it was a mid-air collision, hoping was hard to do. And so America woke up to the news that all 64 passengers and crew on the American Airlines flight from Wichita, Kansas, and the 3 crew members of that military helicopter in that collision were gone. No survivors. There has been a rush into the search for explanations, as there always is in situations like this. The best aviation investigators in the world are on the case, the National Transportation Safety Board, and those answers will be found. They always are. But we don't have those answers tonight. Donald Trump thought he knew the answers this morning when he blamed the gender or race of the people involved in the crash, because he was, as usual, completely indiscriminate in the way he threw his accusation around. No one knows whether he meant the gender and race of the helicopter crew or the gender and race of the airline crew or the gender and race of people in the air traffic control tower at Washington National Airport. And he somehow managed to blame Presidents Joe Biden and Barack Obama for the very existence of people of the wrong gender and the wrong race ever occupying such jobs. It is the first time in history that a president of the United States has assigned blame for an aviation accident on his own, immediately, based entirely on his own profoundly ignorant, prejudiced guess. Every previous president, in reacting to such events, such tragedies, has always begun with sympathy, including the only president who could have been blamed for an accidental plane crash and wasn't.
I'm going to digress for a moment from what I intended to say right here. A terrible tragedy took place in the capital city yesterday. The full extent of that tragedy still not yet known. But I only mention it because there are cynics who don't somehow believe in humanity anymore, and in projects such as the one that you're engaged in and the ones that I've been talking about, doubt whether people can carry them out. Well, what better example? Yesterday we saw a partnership, yes. The agencies and departments of government responsible in times of emergency were there. The heroism of the firemen in the icy waters is well known to all of us. But then there was just a bystander who saw a woman lose her grip on the line the helicopter was using to bring her to shore, and without hesitation he dived into the water. Lenny Skutnik. Nothing had picked him out as particularly to be a hero, but without hesitation, there he was, and he saved her life.
I was thinking about Lenny Skutnik at this desk at this hour last night, with the unforgettable image of him pulling Priscilla Tirado out of the Potomac in my memory and hoping to see something like that last night. Priscilla Tirado's husband and 2-month-old baby did not survive that crash. Ronald Reagan gave Lenny Skutnik a seat of honor 13 days later at the State of the Union address. Lenny Skutnik was the worst thing you can be in Donald Trump's Washington. He was a federal worker. He was an office assistant at the Congressional Budget Office. Lenny Skutnik retired from government service in 2010. He was, for a time, the most famous federal worker in America because of his heroism. 7 months after Lenny Skutnik became an American hero, the New York Times asked him if he would do it all again. He said, "The rescue I'd do again in a minute, but all the stuff that came after, the fame and all that, I could do without. If it ever happened again, I wish the cameras weren't there. The whole thing has been kind of blown out of proportion. I wish the cameras weren't there." There's nothing about Lenny Skutnik, not his humility, not his heroism, nothing about him that Donald Trump could ever understand. Some names, about 13 names, have been confirmed among the people lost in the crash. Samuel Lilly was the first officer on the American Airlines flight. He was inspired to fly by his father, an Army helicopter pilot, and was recently engaged to be married. Christine Lane was traveling with her son Spencer Lane, a member of the Skating Club of Boston, who was returning from the U.S. Figure Skating's National Development Camp in Wichita, Kansas. Alexander Kirsanov, the coach of 2 of the young skaters on the flight. Ian Epstein, a flight attendant on that flight from Wichita. Wendy Jo Schaefer, a wife and mother of 2 children, aged 3 and 1. Justina Beyer, 42 years old, who was on the flight with her daughter, Brielle Beyer, 12 years old. Jin Han was traveling with her daughter, Jinna Han, a member of the Skating Club of Boston, who was also returning from the U.S. Figure Skating's National Development Camp. Evgenia Shishkova, a coach with the Skating Club of Boston. Vadim Namov, a coach with the Skating Club of Boston. It wasn't the first time for the Skating Club of Boston to suffer such a tragedy. The director of the Skating Club of Boston, Doug Zegheib, said this earlier today.
To the best of our knowledge, 14 skaters returning home from the National Development Camp at Wichita, Kansas, put on by U.S. Figure Skating, were lost in the plane crash at Washington, D.C. Of those 14 skaters, 6 were from the Skating Club of Boston, 2 coaches, 2 teenage athletes, and the athletes' moms. Skating is a very close and tight-knit community. These kids and their parents, they're here at our facility in Norwood 6, sometimes 7 days a week. It's a close, tight bond, and I think for all of us, we have lost family. Sadly, this isn't the first time this club has experienced a tragedy like this. It's now a ways back, but in 1961, the entire world team of U.S. figure skating en route to the World Championships in Prague was lost in a plane crash in Belgium. Almost half of everybody on board that plane were from this club. It had long-reaching implications for the skating club and for the sport in this country, because when you lose coaches like this, you lose the future of the sport as well. It's been a long time in redeveloping it. And I personally feel that this club, the Skating Club of Boston, has just now, almost 60 years later, been coming out of the shadow of that 1961 crash. So this is particularly devastating.
There was something else that allowed us all to hope when we first heard the news last night, and that was the seemingly miraculous piloting of our first guest tonight, Captain Sully Sullenberger, when he brought a U.S. air flight with 155 people on board to a successful crash landing on the Hudson River without any loss of life. We had a right to hope for miracles after seeing Captain Sullenberger do that. But that hope slipped away last night in the cold, dark water of the Potomac River.